Imagine running a business where PR feels like a pricey, confusing nightmare. But then suddenly it becomes a clear, credible storytelling engine that lands spotlights on hundreds of brands. That's what Mickey Kennedy turned into reality. He steered e releases from a hands on slog to a system that produced 150 million in earned media for 40,000 plus clients and put dozens in front of Shark Tank. And he did it by stepping back, building systems, and letting the story shine. I'm Ash, and this is the Founders Podcast. We skip the fluff and dive straight into the high stakes stories and proven strategies of the world's most successful builders. If you want the raw breakdown of how brands are built, scaled, and sustained, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, Mickey. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Before we start, Mickey, then, do you have a favorite quote, something that motivates you, inspires you, you would like to share with our audience?
I think that Dr. Seuss says you have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself in any direction you choose. And I think that, for me, that speaks to the entrepreneurial spirit of pivoting and being able to quickly, do what you can. And rather than being overwhelmed when things take a turn for the worse, you pivot, you try different stuff, and you just think on your feet. And so I go back to the basics there.
Indeed, indeed. And that is so relevant to our audience because I think it's the spirit of hustling which keeps them running, despite of all these challenges that they face in their life. Great. So, Mickey, you have an incredible story, right? You have been working over the last 28 years to have a business which generates more than 5 million in revenue. Before that, you've been, trying to do quite a lot of things. And now you have become a PR ninja, if that's the right word. I don't know if it works in your industry or vertical. But let's say, imagine you are in a room full of founders and they're waiting for you. You walk into the stage, you got the spotlight on you, you got the mic. What would you tell them about your story or your one of your client story, whichever one you want to choose,
Sure.
that it will make them stick with us for the rest of the hour?
Right. So I think that PR has a reputation for not being very effective, and there is a lot of ineffective PR out there. I would just point as a case study to a initiative that was set up during the pandemic called the Dining Bond Initiative. And they approached us and said, could we send a press release for them? They were designed as a group of volunteers mostly who, if you reached out to them and you nominated your favorite local restaurant, they would try to get in touch with them and you would give money that went directly to them and, help the restaurants, keep their lights on or maybe pay staff. And, we were sent home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. So this was very early in the pandemic. And we sent the press release out. That was like the only marketing they really did. Generated in excess of $10 million in revenue. Over well over 100 places picked it up. And so I think that really shows the leverage of what a $400 press release can do if it's a meaningful message. And I think that one did so well because it was positive news at a very time of uncertainty and negative sentiment. And people were at home feeling not very empowered. And here was something, if you had a favorite local restaurant you went to on your anniversary, you wanted to just help them out, give them $40 or something. It would be backed by this dining bond concept, sort of a gift certificate thing. And it was just something positive and actionable. And I think that's why it did so well. I mean, it got picked up in Wall Street Journal, CNN, Bloomberg, Harvard Business Review, lots of food publications, but literally, I think 100 local papers picked it up all over the US. It got picked up by Reuters and syndicated out to a lot of different places. And I think that, that shows the possibility of PR. An ROI of $400 to 10 million plus is just astounding. And yet that's possible. If you have a meaningful message and you go over a wire, which makes it available to all media, you can really go wide with that. And these aren't, the press release replicated on these websites. These were individual articles where the journalist looked at that press release and wrote an article about it. So it's a very original
Mm.
content. And, that's just one of those things that happens that I feel is just shows the real value of PR. And you can do this as well. You may not get 100 pickups and generate that kind of ROI, but if you have a meaningful message and you put it out there, you can get media pickup. And if you don't feel that you're newsworthy, you can craft your own newsworthiness. There's a lot of different things in the old PR tool belt that you can put together and get out there and elevate yourself as an expert in your industry and grab a lot of media attention.
That is fantastic. And one of the biggest challenges in founders' life is getting eyeballs on their product or services, right? That is not hidden. Everybody struggles with that unless you're OpenAI and you get millions of users within a week and change the whole world. But let's divide this into two parts. You mentioned crafting your story in a way that it. So I'm trying to innovate a word here. I'm trying to say pickable by the PR, like, press or other, journalists, right? Craft a story which is pickable. Now, 28% of our listeners are mostly the tech founders or people who are working into AI world, right? The tech world is so saturated that it is almost impossible in my mind, because I'm not aware of how the PR magic works, that creating a story around a product seems like talking about something which is millions of far away, but you're just giving that hope that will be soon there. Having that hurdle, what kind of framework our founders could use, in your opinion, craft that story? And then we will go beyond that and talk about the second part.
Right. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of people approach PR in a very selfish way where they just want to put themselves forward and as most prominent. It makes sense. But, the most common press release that we get is a product or service launch. And it usually consists of here's either a new product or a refreshed product or service. And here's a list of features. And from a journalist standpoint, there's not a lot of story there. Even
Mhm.
if a journalist writes a small article, it tends to follow a story arc. And, you know, you may not know what that means, but it's commonplace. A good joke follows a story arc. A good bedtime story to a child follows a story arc.
Story arc, yeah.
Someone telling a story at the water cooler at the office, generally you're going somewhere with it. It has you're not going to believe what happened, and it's going to arrive somewhere that there's a payoff. And the same thing works well for press releases. You don't have to actually tell the press release in the story arc, but you have to give the ingredients for a journalist to craft a story arc. So for a product or service launch, one of the easiest ways to do that is rather than put the spotlight on you the entire press release, but talk about a client that maybe beta tested this product or service and what their experience was, what their obstacle was, and then, where they arrived at the end of the beta test. So if let's say you have a logistics software solution and you had some company that was 3 years old, had never achieved a profit, and you could then take a publicly available data point and say, in fact, in the transportation industry, 62% of these companies fail in the first 5 years because they just don't become profitable. And this looked like it
Mm.
was going to be another casualty. So that shows the stakes of why this matters. And then you take that company and say, at the end of a 6-month trial, they're projected to have their first net profit at the end of this year. And then you have an amazing quote by them talking about how we we always felt that if we won more bids, we would just become profitable. And what this software showed us is we can win all the bids there are, but if they're not profitable and they're not developed in a way that achieves profitability, then it's not worth winning those bids. And so with this intelligence, we're able to bid more profitably. And, that quote and that experience makes a journalist say, wow, that is a very demonstrable outcome that I can then give to my audience. It'll either entertain or educate them as to why this product or service solution is important. And I think that that's one of the most counterintuitive ways in which a company that doesn't feel that they have a lot of newsworthiness, or the media may not feel they have a lot of newsworthiness, is to put the spotlight on other places. You had mentioned Open AI before. Right now,
Mm.
we have a publicity machine with Claude and OpenAI's ChatGPT. and other solutions because people are all everywhere. They're on TikTok, they're on YouTube talking about, you're not going to believe how I did this using this software. These people are promoting ChatGPT and OpenAI in the most organic way. OpenAI and Claude and ChatGPT, they're not paying these people. These people are saying, hey, AI is amazing, and this is how I'm using this tool. So, this kind of organic nature is just really ramping up and creating all kinds of amazing publicity for these companies. And so, that shows that the best demonstrators of publicity for those products and services are the actual end users. And I think that that is what you should sort of look at your products and services and say, are there customers that would be like exemplify the experience of what we feel this product or solution does? If so, let's share the spotlight, because putting the spotlight on them and showing their outcome allows people to better understand and grasp what we're doing in the marketplace. And so, keep that in mind. I also feel like when it comes to talking to the media, we feel like we have to be numbers oriented, and numbers are important. But, everybody that appears on Shark Tank, they don't open with their numbers. They open with their story. And,
Yeah.
they're like, hey, I got laid off, or my father died. And we used to have this stupid thing that we sold at the flea market. And I thought to myself, well, I've got plenty of time now. I wonder if I could turn that into a business and sort of honor my father's legacy. And so all of a sudden, that brings us in that human interest element and gets us to care. That's the most powerful element of PR, is to getting people to care and want to care about you. And if you can put that a story in a press release, it makes the journalists want to pay attention to you even more, because they know that you're going to speak to their audience and make them care. And making an audience care is one of the most powerful things that a journalist can do by telling a story. So, I've had clients who anecdotally shared embarrassing stories, and I insist that they put them in the press release. And one was an embarrassing story where basically everybody at Thanksgiving had to get and go to the family garage and fulfill orders, because they were just
Mhm.
inundated with orders, and they were afraid that they weren't going to get them out in time for their people to receive them in order to use them for the holidays. And so they all chipped in, as a lot of families of entrepreneurs did. And we shared that story, and it became the lead to a 2-page story in Inc. magazine about that company. At the time, that company already had multiple warehouses. They were semi successful, they were growing, and they were like, why would we share such an embarrassing story from way back when? And I said, it's something that the readers of Inc. magazine who are entrepreneurs probably can identify with. We've all been there in the beginning. Challenges, compromises, families and who have a parent who's an entrepreneur, there's a little bit of sacrifice that goes on. And I think that people identified with that. And I think that that's why they chose that. So, your why, your unique story is important. And, you may not be able to get that out in every press release, but, I think for the first 4 years, every article that talked about eBay talked about the founder creating this software solution to help, I think, his girlfriend at the time sell her Pez collection. And he's like,
Mm.
as an engineer, he's like, well, the best way to sell it is individually and to auction it, and I'll create a website for you. And all of a sudden, that's how eBay was started.
eBay was born.
Turns
Yeah.
out that story was a little crafted by PR, but it was a story that immediately got people to understand the concept of why having a software auction solution is valuable, and how it works. It's like you could just take something like a Pez collection and break it apart and sell each Pez and give it its own listing. And it immediately solved the problem of how do we explain an auction website to people and get them to really understand the concept. And that was a really great way to do that. And so, is there a story that you have, ideally one that's true and accurate, that you could share with the media that would immediately get people to care or to completely understand and readily appreciate your business? And, and also, that being said, that's one type of release. There's many other types of releases that you can do. There's, things that are going on in your industry that are trending. Often that's a time not to join the conversation, but to actually counter the conversation. If you have a contrarian viewpoint to something that's trending in your industry, that is valuable. And you
Mm.
just have to make sure that your contrarian viewpoint doesn't hurt you with your existing customers and that you come across as reasonable. And so if everybody is talking pro electric cars in your automotive industry and you're like, hey, I want to raise my hand here and say there's a lot of problems with electric cars. You know, the mining that comes out of the ground to make these minerals for batteries, not environmentally sound. Some of it involves child allegations of child labor. There's also, what are we going to do with all these batteries at the end of their life? And, are we creating another problem? And then, if a electric car gets in a car accident and catches fire, often it takes like many tens of thousands of gallons of water to put out a lithium battery or the types of batteries that they use. So you getting out there and entering the conversation with a contrarian viewpoint, that's valuable for this reason. Journalists like to have both sides represented. And most stories go to print only showing one side because no one ever raised their hand and said, hey, I have a counterpoint, a contrarian viewpoint to this. And if you're willing to do that, you stand the likelihood of being plugged into every article that talks about that subject. So if you join the conversation, you're competing with thousands of other people who could easily lend a quote or an opinion to an article. But if you have the contrarian viewpoint, you're like the sole person who's speaking out in your industry, and you can be plugged into hundreds of articles. And so that's really valuable. And, in a lot of ways, when it comes to getting media attention, do not look at the press releases that are out there. Don't look at what your competitor is sending. 97% of press releases that are out there, they are not getting media pickup. They're not being translated into articles. They're not getting earned media. And so you want to focus on the 3% of types of press releases that are getting picked up. And these are the ones that I've mentioned where you talk about, the story arc. You talk about your personal story and your personal journey. You get people to care about you. You have a contrarian viewpoint. You share that to the media. But there's lots of other cool things you can do if you just are creative. One is an industry survey or study where you just take the pulse of your industry on several subjects. Some can be subjects that are trending right now, which might be AI, how it's impacting your industry, or it could be workplace changes. Are people not wanting to come into the office, having had some freedom during the pandemic? Is it hard to get people to do certain things in the office that they didn't do? And also, are there other things that you can brainstorm in your industry that maybe you've noticed, but you're not quite sure, is this an industry trend? And I call those blind spots where the industry hasn't really talked about them. But if you can uncover a blind spot in your industry, you can get a lot of media attention for it. I had a local carpet company in New Jersey. Can't
Mm.
think of a more non-newsworthy company. They sell carpet. And it's like basically one of the worst positions to be in because you are basically selling something that a lot of other people are selling, and you're offering a service installation that anybody can do. So what makes you unique? And in their case, they shared the story about how bad big box home improvement stores are for the carpet industry. And these are here in the US, like the Home Depot and Lowe's of the world. And that resonated so strongly that they got like 10 articles in floor trade publications. And at the end of our campaign with them, they had also got picked up in their local newspaper and New Jersey Magazine, which was a higher end consumer magazine. And, a lot of these industry publications, I realize their customers aren't reading them. It's other carpet companies. But based on all that authority, they put together what they called a brag book, all the clippings in one place, and they gave it to all their salespeople. And every time they went in and quoted someone a price for the job, they'd say, hey, we may not come in the cheapest, but if you look here, we've been picked up by Floor Trade Weekly, warning about how bad the big box home improvement stores are for people, even though you may save a few $100s. And here we are in the local newspaper. Here we are in New Jersey. Just by adding that conversation, maybe 2 minutes to the sales
Mm.
process, they started converting almost 20% more of their leads. And so that's almost 1 out of every 5 sales that they were previously losing, they're now winning. And that's considerable to a business that, you can only talk to so many people in a day and give them quotes that, a 20% increase in revenue and leads is substantial. And that goes back to the credibility that happens when someone reads you or sees that you're in an article. These
Mm.
aren't advertisements. They're not the press release replicated on a website. They're actual articles that a journalist crafted and the headlines unique and the approach, the articles unique. And that's valuable. And you can't sort of, artificially make that out there.
Make that.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't work. And so that's the real value of earned media. And I think that it can apply to anybody, because if you can get a carpet company in New Jersey to put the creative hat on and figure out a unique approach, I think almost anyone can do it,
Hmm.
regardless of what business you're in. And I'd mentioned the industry survey. It's a matter of then putting together really interesting questions. I like to use like SurveyMonkey because it's easy to analyze the results. You get a link and then just approach a smaller independent trade association in your industry. You don't need a Rolodex of a couple hundred people to send it to.
Hmm.
You don't go to the big trade association because they don't need you and they control their own PR. But if you go to one of the smaller ones, and they do exist, you just have to do a little research. They're out there. And
Hmm.
every time someone has said, "I don't think so," I had someone say in the PR industry, "Well, Mickey, in our industries, there's only Public Relations Society of America." I had to educate them that there were over 700 other trade associations for PR in the United States. Some of them very small, like mid-Atlantic PR firms or Florida, but some were like shops of 50 employees or less, which probably encompasses 80% of the industry. And so if you reach out to them and say, "Hey, could you take this link and share it with your members? We're conducting a survey. I'll be issuing a press release in the coming weeks over PR Newswire, and I'd love to mention your organization." They see that as a win-win. They see it as an opportunity for them to get PR as well. And again, they're not the big association in the industry. So they've got a little chip on their shoulder about not being recognized. And so more than 2/3 of the time, they'll say yes. If not, you just move on to another trade association in the industry. But I find that works really well because you're sharing the spotlight, and by mentioning them in the press release, it gives you a little more credibility to be associated with them as well. And you look at the results of the survey. Never focus on more than one or two elements from the survey. So you have to pick what's going to surprise people most from the survey. Maybe you ask 12 questions, and maybe it's what your industry feels AI is going to do to it in the next 5 years. And maybe 67% said they fear they'll be replaced in the next 5 years because of AI. And one of the things that you can do is then put yourself in there as the expert and providing a little bit of analysis saying, "Well, I think that underscores the fears in our industry. I don't think that it's going to result in 2/3 of the people losing their job. But I do think that people who don't know how to incorporate AI into their role over the next few years will be at a serious disadvantage." And it's a way that quote makes you seem very reasonable, articulate, and understanding of the situation, where you just don't say, "Hey, this is what they said, so therefore it must be true." You can sort of counter it and relax and get people to see that, hey, there's some fear here, but I don't think it's going to translate into the losses that people fear it could. And again, every time we've done a survey in an industry, it generally results in anywhere from, I think, 6 to 14 articles. And these are usually industry specific trade publications. There might be newspapers. It's a lot of credibility, and it's going to make you, as the author of that survey, really elevated and stand out in your industry as an expert. And you then
Yeah.
take the results from these articles and you share it with your leads. You're going to convert more because they're going to say, "Wow, we were considering this company. Looks like they really know what they're talking about. They're seen as experts in the industry." And you put it in front of your existing customers, and that'll reduce your churn rate, because there are people who every year who feel like we have to shop around and just make sure we're using the right person. But if they see that, they're like, "Why would we shop around? We're definitely with the right company. They're killing it.
Yeah.
They're
we
being
we are
recognized."
we are with the right company, and we have already done our due diligence to figure out like if they are good or not, right? Great stuff. So okay, so the first part is sorted then. Even though you are a corporate company, you can come up with a creative way of a story. That's good. We can always talk about how to craft the story in a later episode. Let's talk about the second part. You have the story ready. You have your press release ready. I think one of the biggest challenge nowadays is getting in front of journalists, right? There's lots of free service. I think it's called Hora or something, which
Help a reporter out.
something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
Helper Haru, and there is some other more. and you can register on them, but it's like a daily churn of incoming emails, and then you have to reach out to them. What are the tools or platforms or founders could use to reach out to journalists, and what's the correct way to do it? Because I'm guessing these journalists are getting, I am not sure, thousands of email every day or
Right.
even more.
Right. So email used to be a very effective way to reach journalists. Is actually what the E and e-releases stood for, because originally I started as emailing journalists. But unfortunately, media databases have come out in the last 20 years, and so for a fee of $5,000 to $20,000, your organization gets access to a media database. And ideally, if everybody used it the way they were supposed to, I don't think it would be as problematic as it is. But what happens is, if you're a golf club company, you spent $10,000 to get this database for 1 year, and you email the 1,400 golf people who report on golf products and told them about your great golf club, and none of them wrote about it, or very few did. You start talking yourself into sending it to more people. They're like, well, business people like to play golf and banking people like to play golf. So let's send it to financial analysts. Let's send it to all these other reporters that will never cover a golf club. You're never going to get a financial analyst to write about golf clubs or care about them. And so that's happening in every industry. And so if you're a national journalist, your inbox is probably chaos because of this. So many off-targeted press releases are reaching you. So it's become a very ineffective way to reach people. PR firms still do email pitches, but then a lot of them are having to call and say, "Hey, I sent you an email," and then they have to go get the journalists searching to find it among the chaos and sort of get their attention. So what has become more important is the wire. And in the US, it's basically a duopoly of press release wires. It's Business Wire, owned by Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, I think, and also PR Newswire. PR Newswire is the oldest and largest, and that's who we work with. They're expensive. Being the consolidation resulting in mostly a duopoly has created a situation where it's almost $2,000 to move a 600-word press release nationally over PR Newswire, and pretty close to that with Business Wire as well. Through e-releases, you get a national distribution on PR Newswire for under $500. So it's a huge savings going through e-releases. The caveat is we work with clients that PR Newswire's sales team doesn't want to bother with. They're
Hmm.
looking for Fortune 500 companies, publicly traded companies that are, spending $20,000 to $40,000 in press release distribution and media databases and multimedia newsrooms and all the bells and whistles. But for small companies like the ones we serve, whose budget might be $2,000 or $3,000 a year, they're not interested. But in aggregate, because we do more than 10,000 releases a year, it is a substantial amount that we do pay PR Newswire. So that's why the partnership, I think, works so well. They're able to get this money, but we deal with the small clients and we handle them, and their sales team doesn't have to be bothered with it. And so that's the real value of it. Now, the concept of wire exists outside of that. There's a lot of noise of people who charge $200, $300, $400 with wire in their name, but they're not reaching journalists. In most cases, they're doing syndication, and that's where the press release gets replicated on a few different websites. That happens with PR Newswire, but it's not one of their focuses. So when you do a press release with PR Newswire, it appears as a press release on Yahoo Finance, and it appears on a few other websites. It's completely the press release replicated. And if you ever see your press release replicated on a bunch of websites, you know that that's not important, because A, it doesn't help you from an SEO standpoint. It's duplicate content. And B, it's something that's just paid for. So it's not very important. There are also wires out there that people have heard of, like the Associated Press, the AP. They don't run press releases. There's Reuters. They don't run press releases. They do subscribe to PR Newswire and Business Wire, which is a free service for them. And they look at press releases, but everything they run is written by them. And the reason
Hmm.
is they license it to newspapers. They license it to websites. So if you ever see a newspaper that has AP in front of it, it means the newspaper decided to just license that article rather than them write it. And, it's cheaper to have one organization write a Supreme Court ruling announcement that came in late in the day and pull that down rather than have someone on their team stay after hours and pay overtime to write it. And so, and you're getting a good quality article at the end of the day. But, so you want to make sure in this world that you are going over Business Wire or PR Newswire. You don't have to go over both of them. One is sufficient because journalists will check both. They would be
Mm.
remiss in only checking one. But most journalists are checking the wire. And the reason is, unlike their inbox, when they log into Business Wire or PR Newswire with their journalist access, they see the feed, their default feed, and they can also customize it. So they make sure that it pins press releases that mention a certain term, maybe for the next 48 hours. If this term is there, that's hot. I'm really following that in my industry. I want to make sure I see it. It can also exclude certain press releases. Say maybe you cover fashion, but you don't cover ready to wear and retail. So JC Penney's mentioned, or companies like that, you can exclude those releases. So you're only looking at press releases that probably better fit what your thing is. Exact opposite experience of what's happening in their inbox. And so for that reason, the wire is more important today than it's ever been. But being in a duopoly environment does make it expensive. So I'm very happy that eReleases is able to help smaller businesses and startups and entrepreneurs by having a low cost solution of giving them access to a national release on PR Newswire, including all of their industries that would be represented as well.
Got it. So I wanted to show my listeners what exactly it means when you say, it's so difficult to get PR wire, right? Is this the correct one? PR Newswire? Is this the one?
Correct. Yep.
Or yeah?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So, oh my God, look at the sponsored links here, right? There's a
Correct.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 already there. Okay, let's click on it then. So this is what you're saying, that this is uh, well, duopoly, because this is one of the biggest one, and then after this it's a different one, right?
Business Wire is the other one.
Yeah. Okay, business wise, that one. So in order to get an account on PR Newswire, you basically have to be somewhere in the budget of $20,000 to $30,000. Uh, that's what we have learned today, right?
That's the sweet spot that their
Sweet spot.
salespeople are looking for. You can certainly
Got
spend less. There is a membership fee each year. I think it's like
it.
$400 or so.
Mm,
And then if you're looking at a U.S. national distribution, it's close to I think it's like over almost $1,800 for a 600-word press release, and only goes up from there. So it is quite pricey to work with them directly. We
mm.
are sort of acting as a co-op for smaller businesses, and if you come through us and you're a large client, we just refer you directly to PR Newswire. So we try to be a good partner with them, so that we're targeting the types of customers that they're not interested in working with.
Got it. Okay. So that is one of the other challenge founders have, right? They don't have a lot of money. They have a small seed funding available with them, and then after that they just have to make sure that they deliver the promises they have said initially, so that their investors could put either more money, or new investors come in and then put more money, right? So let's talk about some numbers then. If a founder comes to you for press release, what are the numbers we're talking about? And obviously, I understand that it depends upon case to case and things like that. So let's take a hypothetical situation. Let's take a situation where founder created open source product, a backend database, I don't know, something, right? And they reach out to you. They say, "Oh, this is open source. This is a mighty license. We want to reach out to as many as people. We want to work with Mickey." And could you tell us what's the process and how much it could cost us?
Sure. So the process is just to reach out to us either through email or us a phone call or chat. You'll talk to an editor. We don't have any salespeople or sales team. And
Mm.
we do have a new customer special. It's in our footer. It's $349 for our Newsmaker, which is our most popular product. And so you could, if you have a release written, you could just upload it and spend $349. You are given the opportunity to buy a package at that pricing. So you can lock in, say 6 or more press releases for, less than, I think $2,000, substantially less. And so that allows you to then use over the next year up to 6 releases for, locking in your distribution cost of $2,000. We do offer writing, but I do encourage a lot of people to try to write their releases themselves. They are you're the expert of your industry. Feel free to lean on AI a little bit to write, because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, the end product is for journalists. It's not what's going to be, what the journalist is putting on their website, but you want to make sure it's accurate. And for the best outcome with AI, I never let it decide what to write about. AI has been trained on the 97% of press releases that don't work.
Mm,
So if you tell the press release to write a press release about your company, it will. It'll look good. It'll read well, but it probably won't generate earned media because it's not one of those press releases that I talked about. And so, but I always go to AI and say, this is what I want you to write about. This is my company. Ask me any questions you need, but give me the structure of what a press release would look like. And it invariably writes the press release. And I say, I'm going to disregard that. I just want the structure at this point. And
mm,
then they'll give you the structure and say, okay, give me, you name it, 6 headline options for this press release. And if one really speaks to you, go with that. Say, I picked this headline. Could you then give me 3 opening paragraphs for this headline?
mm,
And if you like one of those, you go with it. Or maybe you like this one, but you say, hey, I like this paragraph, but I really would like you to somehow incorporate this phrase or word in there that's really important in my industry. Boom, then you get it and say, okay, now write the second paragraph. And generally, by the second or third paragraph, you want to say, give me an opportunity for a quote by me, and make sure it's an amazing quote. Even if it does, you're going to have to go in there and punch it up. And
mm,
I say an amazing quote. You said something very strong, active verbs, a lot of conviction. It's not something that looks like it was written by committee. Almost 100% of press releases that have quotes in them, maybe it's 99%. The quote looks like it was written by committee. It's soft. It doesn't really say anything. If a journalist paraphrased what you wrote, there'd be no loss. So I say that's the
mm.
ultimate test. If you took out what you wrote and just paraphrased it, would there be a loss? Would you ache for what was previously written because it was said so succinctly or with such conviction and strength, or just was powerful? That's the measure of a good quote. And often I feel like AI doesn't bring it. Sometimes you have to really punch it up a little bit and
Mm,
then, go through the rest of the press release. It might take 6 minutes or 10 minutes instead of like 60 seconds to pop it out, but you'll end up with a press release that's much more meaningful and much more likely to be picked up. And so it's one of those things that I tell people, never measure PR with a single press release. We get those all the time. I tried PR, it didn't work. And I was like, well, what'd you do? I sent a press release about Eleanor, our new HR director.
mm,
Why did you choose that as your subject matter for your one single press release to measure all of PR? And they said, well, I saw my competitor do it.
mm,
Probably didn't work for your competitor, didn't work for you. The media rarely cares about low level employees. If you have a new CEO or president, you have an industry veteran that you brought onto the board or is now going to lead your sales team, that's worth shouting. That's worth writing a press release about. But most rank and file employees, not meaningful enough to send a press release out. You'd have better results taking that person's headshot, going to your local newspaper, maybe your local business magazine, maybe individual trade publications. They often have an on the move section where you just upload the headshot and put the information in, and they generally cover it as long as there's room. And
mm,
so that's what I would do with those types of press releases, because it's really going to be impossible to get them to care. But that's probably our second most popular press release is we have a new hire and we want to send a press release, and I've reached out to some of these people and said, I noticed it didn't do anything. And they said, yeah, we didn't expect it to do much, but it made the person feel really good who got hired. So I get it, but
yeah,
I also
yeah,
feel like it's a lost opportunity, because if you had
yeah.
sent something a lot more meaningful, you could have leveraged that $400 or $500 to, potentially something stronger. Like, the example I used of more than $10 million. I had one client who called me, and they were, I think, an assistant at a waste management building facility. And the boss said, we need to send a press release. Go do that. So they said, what do I do here? And in that case, we did write the press release because they had no idea what a press release was. And that was quite a few years ago before there was AI. And we sent it out, and they got picked up in Waste News, which was I think a monthly trade publication. It's a big one. And the guy contacted me a few months ago later after that and said, "You're not going to believe it, but I got a big bonus this year because of that press release." And they said they got contacted. They build everything, nuts and bolts, the whole waste management facility, including recycling. And they
Mm.
usually do it for cities. And they said, we got contacted by a couple of cities in Australia. And they said, do you do this internationally? And they said, yeah, we sent them information about how we'd done this in India and a couple of other international sites they had done, I think in Asia, and talked about how they work. And they'll send someone over and coordinate with the local construction team to take all the pieces they ship over there and put together to build the facility. They ended up,
Mm.
I think, those two cities signing with them, and I think it was over 30 or $40 million job.
Wow.
They just
Wow.
a lead came from this where they someone was reading the magazine or the industry publication and said, "Wow, there's someone who does this. Would they do it for us?" And so that's what happens when you get the word out and people find out about you. Not every press release is going to generate that kind of money, but it shows the opportunities that exist by getting the word out and getting people to know about you. In that case, it was just one article that we knew about that they got, and
What
that
what
one article generated a lot of leads, including that one, which turned out to be substantial.
What about these companies who promise you online about outreach? So, for example, I get bombarded with these sales SDRs on LinkedIn almost every month asking for 100 euros, because lots of PR companies in Europe, they say, oh, for 100 euro we will reach out for you for 10,000 journalists. You just have to draft your PR and then give it to us. What would you say about them?
So at that price point, I know it's not going over a wire. And so I imagine they just have access to a database and they're just sending
Emailing them.
these press releases out. I don't think they're going to be
Mm.
very effective. There's also people that guarantee you in Forbes online and for a few $100 or $2,000. I've seen as much as we've been approached by Forbes as well. These aren't the actual magazine. These aren't the actual website. It's I think what used to be guest bloggers. And so it's a sub page of their website that they're now monetizing by getting people to write articles or have articles written about them. And for a fee, they just go up there. It doesn't get in the print magazine. If you
Mm.
search the main website, it usually doesn't show up because it's not their main content. It's just a way for them to monetize subdomains or different categories. And I always say, if you have to pay for it, I would avoid it. I mean, I know that in some spaces, having an unsophisticated customer base, you can make a Forbes article seem like you're important. But if people peel back to a little bit more, or people who know a bit about how this works, they'll understand that that's just paid placement, and it's probably not worth it. For $2,000 you could do almost four press releases and legitimately get picked up by real media by doing strategic types of press releases. So I tell people, to avoid that, to send a release over a wire, it generally is going to cost $2,000. I know that we have our arrangement with PR Newswire. I'm not aware of anyone else that is in our space that offers access to Business Wire or PR Newswire anything close to what we charge. And so I would be suspicious of anything that comes in real cheap. I noticed some of the links that you provided when you did that search included places with wire in the name that doesn't reach journalists. They're just syndication plays. And so that's one of the things that people have to be educated about, because if you take a non-newsworthy press release and send it through their service, you will get a report that shows your press release on a bunch of websites. Most of these websites get zero traffic, zero eyeballs. Journalists never sees it. Your customers never see it. The only people that really gets excited about those are maybe the CEO or the board, or people looking at the links and don't know any better. This isn't important, and that's why again, we get approached by them as well, because some of them are charging $69. And they're like, hey, for $10, if you take every press release you're issuing, like 1,000 a month sometimes, and send them through us, we'll only charge you $10. And I was like, I don't want to confuse the marketplace even more by telling my customers this is important, because it's not. I tell my customers, you're going to get picked up in Yahoo. That's not anything to be excited about. You're going to get picked up
Mm.
on a couple dozen other websites. That's not important. We are looking for earned media. We want an article
Yeah.
written about you, not that press release replicated in different places. So and that doesn't happen for everybody. You have to keep testing and trying, doing strategic types of press releases. But when you do get earned media, you know it because generally the phones ring, leads come in, people want to know about you. It's generally meaningful. And then you also want to seize that opportunity by taking screenshots, taking the link to it, sharing it with your social media, sharing it on your newsletter, share your successes, put it on your website, hopefully have a newsroom where you put your press releases and your successes and screenshots of it because eventually these pages disappear, especially with newspapers because they're always changing CRMs or content management systems, CMSs. And when they change, they usually just purge all the old content rather than port it over and then just start fresh. And so you want to make sure you preserve these things and put them on your website because they are indicators that you're legitimate and that you've been recognized for some successes.
That's great. That's great. So let's talk a little bit more about, before getting into our quick fire round, what's the best geography for your product or service to
North
reach out?
America, predominantly the United States. Our distribution is a U.S. national distribution. You can add country add-ons, but they're not as robust because PR Newswire has a presence internationally, but it's largely known for
US.
its U.S. distribution. And also, I think that we work with people internationally, but they're often looking to reach the U.S. market. And so I wouldn't tell an Australian company who's looking to reach Australian media, we're a great fit. But if it's an Australian company that wants to reach the U.S. market, we're a perfect fit. That's ideally what we are for.
Right. Great stuff. Okay, Mickey, thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom with our listeners. Before we move into the quickfire round, I just wanted to say that at any point, if you think that you don't want to answer any of this question, just give me a skip and then we can move on to the next one. Is that okay?
Sure. And one thing I did want to point out is for anybody who's looking for these brainstorm ideas of strategic types of press releases, I have a short video about an hour long where I go into the types of meaningful press releases that people should consider. I call it a free masterclass. And if anyone's interested, it's ereleases.com/plan, PLAN. And I guarantee anybody that goes through that will probably end up with a brainstorm of 12 newsworthy ideas for them, including if you are a non-newsworthy company like a carpet company or something like that. So I did want to point that out because a lot of people do feel overwhelmed as to what can I write about? What should I choose? And I think that's a great place to start. Again, that's ereleases.com/plan, PLAN.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mickey. I will make sure that I'll mention that into our show notes later on. So question number one, what are the top 3 strategies to get into the top PR or newsworthy platforms as a product or service from a founder's perspective in 2026?
So having a very defined USP, what differentiates you from everybody in the marketplace, being small and unknown. If you're a big brand, it's harder to get media attention. They expect you to advertise. But if you're small or unknown, journalists love that because they get more accolades by people saying, wow, this is a great discovery. I didn't know this existed. I didn't know that this solution was there. And then third, I would say is, just being responsive. Getting out there, communicating, being available to the media. Maybe what you sent out for that press release wasn't perfectly what they were looking for, but maybe they're thinking of another topic that's related to you and they're reaching out to you and saying, hey, what do you feel about this? Whenever you get approached by the media, take that as an opportunity. I would put together an amazing quote in reaction to what they just asked about. And they'll be like, wow, that's a great quote about this issue. And again, if you have an amazing quote, the journalist can build the article around it. So stay available and communicate and, just be willing to pivot with the media's needs and wants.
Awesome. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
So I think Perry Marshall has the 80/20 of, I think it's sales and marketing. And I would recommend that because it really goes into the Pareto principle at play in sales and marketing. One of the things I found out is that, my staff was often involved with just a few customers that were very difficult and they demanded a lot more than almost all of my other customers combined. And one of the things that we did is we just explained to them that we're not a good fit or you have to change your demands on my staff. And so sometimes firing customers that take up 80% of your noise and labor allows you to free up to focus on the great customers that you have and be able to better service them and more of those.
What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
I think being not having a lot of ego. I think for me, one of the things that helped me succeed is, when I got feedback from people, I didn't think that I was right. I felt like, well, my background isn't really business, so maybe they're right. Maybe what they're saying is better aligned and I should test it. And so one of the things that I did is I was told by one person that how we onboarded people, sending them a welcome package, they found it kind of unprofessional. And I was following a marketing guy, Dan Kennedy, who said, send a shock and awe package. That's what they called it. So we sent like a crazy party in a box. It was like $70 worth of stuff as well as the shipping. And a lot of people loved it. But that one person who told me they thought it was unprofessional made me question maybe they're right. And so what we did is we split tested all new customers over the next 6 months. And it's a large
Mhm.
population. It was like, I think around 1,400 customers. And so 700 people got that package, and the other 700 just got a letter and a book that I'd written. And that was the difference. And what we saw at the end of a year was the people who just received the book and letter, their lifetime value was already like double what the other population was. And at that point, we stopped sending the shock and awe package. And so I think that a lot of people who have a strong ego would have said, I think I know what I'm doing. This great marketer says I should do this. I'm just going to follow them. I say trust the data and, don't have
Mhm.
an ego going into things. Lead by data and not by, what you think is right. And I found that for me, I I saved a lot of money because sending out a book and a letter was like $15 as opposed to
Very, very
70.
expensive. Yeah.
And also it allowed me to sort of better convey a professional image to people, even though a lot of people liked what I was doing, that it was definitely causing enough of a problem
More
that
damage than addition to your brand. Yeah,
yeah,
I can understand.
absolutely. And so I
What's
think
your
yeah,
what's sorry, yeah, I was just saying, what's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
I think for me, it's being engaged with my creative mind. I do creative writing, specifically poetry, and I think it's a great outlet for me and engages my creative mind. When I sit and talk with clients and we brainstorm, they're like, I never would have thought of that. And I just feel like
Mm,
constantly engaging your creative side keeps you open to possibilities that makes you able to pivot more, makes you think on your feet, makes you consider things that a lot of people feel like they're locked in. We've tried everything. And then I'm like, just having a brainstorm session with them. That's what happened with the carpet company. We were locked in, had done 5 press releases, none of them had done anything. And
mm,
we were brainstorming. And I said, "Who's your biggest enemy?" And I thought it would be like Hal's Rug Emporium across the street, but they're like, "No,
mm.
it's big box home improvement stores. And they're bad for the industry, and this is why." And I was like, wow, that's what we should focus on, that blind spot. Because I asked him, I said, do they talk about this in your industry? He goes, not really. And so by
Mm.
bringing that forward, a lot of trade publications immediately jumped on it and said, yeah, we've missed the ball on this. This is something that people are interested in and is an industry threat. And so I think that that's why that worked really well.
Great. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
I think that for me, from a business standpoint, I would like to help other people more. I think that I love education. That's why I love doing podcasts where I can sort of give people a little bit of education about the opportunities that are out there. But there's also a lot of small business owners who, don't know about split testing or they only know about it in advertising and they'd never think of like, gosh, should I split test how I onboard new customers? Should I consider things like that? And so I feel like, getting out there and sharing with others and helping small businesses grow is something that I have a passion with. I do work with EO, which is an organization, Entrepreneurs Organization, and we have a Baltimore chapter. And I have just finished up a year with their accelerator program, helping smaller companies that don't yet qualify for EO to grow their businesses. And I'm really passionate about that.
Great. What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
I think it's the poetry thing. I think when people find out that I went to graduate school to pursue creative writing and that I have published couple of books of poetry. A lot of people are surprised about that. But I think that having that balance has really helped me as a business owner and also as a PR person because I think it allows me to engage my mind in a way that I can think more creatively about opportunities that are there. And if ideas come to you that seem like they're the same ideas that everyone else is doing, it's probably
Mm,
hard for those to work. But I'm really good at tailoring ideas for individual clients.
great stuff. So, Mickey, thank you so much for answering the quick fire six question. We have a very new segment for our 20th season, which is where we ask question to the previous guest to ask our next guest. So they have given us one question to ask you. They had no idea who's going to be our next guest or, identity or anything. So it's a very generic question. But before I ask you that question, I want you to ask you, what would you ask our next guest on our show?
I guess what a creative passion do you have outside of business?
Okay. But this question, what creative passion you have outside of your business? Okay, that's what you want to ask. Okay, let me note it down. Right. So time for you to answer the question from our previous guest. The previous guest surprisingly asked this question is what is distribution means to you?
Was distribution. So
Can you imagine the coincidence?
yeah. So for me, it's all about press release distribution
Yeah.
and getting out to the media. And it has evolved over the last 28 years where I started with eBell and now we're working with The Wire. And for me, distribution is just about connectivity and networking and getting out there to the biggest available audience. And for me, the audience is journalists. And for me, right now, today, the newswire is probably the most effective way to do that.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Mickey, for joining me today and sharing your story and backing last years of building the business and some of the ups and downs. If people want to check out or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it?
So the website's ereleases.com. We have chat, email, phones. All of our social media is on the lower right, and it's my direct LinkedIn there. Feel free to click on that and reach out to me through LinkedIn as well. And again, that masterclass I'd mentioned is at ereleases.com/plan, PL.
Great stuff. Mickey, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you're doing for the founders. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.